Hey there guys, welcome to my compound life. I am Jonathan. This is a channel where we build assets, we build habits, and of course we build freedom. That will be financial freedom, time freedom for you and me and anyone else that watches my videos. So do drop a like and hit subscribe because I make daily Bitcoin video and I hope you guys enjoy my content. And of course, quick disclaimer, this is not a financial or investment advice. I'm not a licensed advisor by all means. Everything here is for education and entertainment only. Okay, so let's start with Bitcoin daily. As of time of recording, it's the 7th of February 2026, around 3:30 in the afternoon in the UK, in the West Midlands. So it's good to see you all. Let's look at price action for Bitcoin. Price now for Bitcoin is trading around 70,000, just under 70,000, 69,122. In the past 24 hours, it went up a huge 17%, starting from about 60,000, hitting a high near 71,000 and low around 60,000. Right, that was the dip. Right, I think many of you guys actually bought the dip. So well done, guys. Well done. Hit the like, guys. Hit the like. We are, however, about 44% away from the previous all-time high of around 126,000 back in October the 6th last year. Of course, in the past 24 hours, Bitcoin saw one of its biggest bounces ever, kind of like a V-shaped recovery. So this kind of quick recovery often happens when too many people are betting against it and get forced out. So these are kind of like leverage long, gets killed, get wiped out, and then leverage short again gets killed, gets wiped out. And the price action shows showing a possible recovery, maybe. Okay, so as you can see, I think the last time we spoke about this is kind of like the zone. Let's just minimize myself more. Okay, so around 71,500 seems to be the resistance now. So, we've tried to hit it a few times. We couldn't get past. But of course, I think 200 weeks moving average, as indicated by this thin blue line at the bottom here, that's around 58,000 for the 200 weeks moving average. We never quite hit it. We got to about 60,000 and then that's it, and then immediately bounced back. I'll actually explain to you guys why we actually gotten to about 60,000 in just a moment. So stick around, watch towards the end. I'll actually show why we got into that 60,000. Okay, so yeah, I think, will we get lower? I'm not too sure. So I'll get into some charts to explain some of the theory, but I'm also speculating because the fact that Bitcoin tends to take approximately 12 months to get to the bottom, right? So if we hit the all-time high last year around early October, rightfully we should get to the bottom around October, November, December this year, right? However, it does seem this time round the bottom, or Bitcoin hitting the 200 weeks moving average quite earlier at the bear phase, right? So by the way, I think Bitcoin usually hits 200 weeks moving average every time after it hits all-time high, right? So let's zoom out the chart, right? So for every cycle, let's just go into 1 week maybe. Yeah. So for every cycle, right, Bitcoin peak, the last one, it took about 31 weeks to get to the bottom, right? And that was a 68% drop. And this time round, it didn't get to the bottom. I mean, from peak to 200 weeks moving average, it took about 31 weeks, and that was a 68% drop. Okay, but this time round, slightly different. Okay, we haven't quite hit the 200 weeks moving average. However, this time round, it took about, let me do this again, do it properly. It took about 17 weeks to get to about 50, about 52% drop. Okay, so not as steep, but certainly the time frame is getting less in comparison to the last. So this is the last cycle, right? And this was the last cycle that it took about 52 weeks to get to the 200 weeks moving average, and that was a drawdown of 84%. Okay, so can you guys somehow see some sort of pattern here, right? 52 weeks, huge, massive drawdown, right? 84%. And then this one took less, 31 weeks, 68%. And of course, this time round, since the fact that we haven't got a parabolic move, okay, it took about 17 weeks. Okay, 17 weeks for us to get there, almost getting to about 200 weeks moving average. Okay, so we'll see how it all plays out. Yeah, but today, rather than showing you my normal chart, what I want to show you guys today is something slightly different. Okay, so today I want to go in to further explain this chart. It's called the Bitcoin Power Curve Cycle Cloud. Okay, so this specific chart, it comes from a post on X by a user. I reckon you guys should follow him, because every now and then, every couple of days, he'll actually update this chart. So it's APSK32, who is an engineer specializing in Bitcoin data visualization space and art. So he's got well over 39,000 followers, and it's verified on X. Okay, so it's this guy. Okay, so the chart is based on the Bitcoin power law theory. Okay, so that specific theory was first proposed by analysts Giovanni Santoratasi, something like that. I can't really pronounce Italian name, I believe. Okay, so this theory says Bitcoin's price doesn't grow exponentially like some think, right? But follows a power law, a steady mathematical curve over time. And that's usually influenced by the 4-year halving cycle, where new Bitcoin supply gets cut in half, right? So why am I raising this? Because I still want you guys to factor in, yes, this time around, Bitcoin, it's very, very different because the buyers are different, right? The buyers are not just you, me, and anyone else. It's a lot more driven by the institutions and so forth, right? However, I still truly believe that the fact that Bitcoin still follows through the 4-year cycle, right? And as we can see from the fourth, this is the 4th cycle. Every cycle, it kind of followed through the similar trends, right? Where you get the accumulation zone during the halving event, and then afterwards, the price goes up, right? So, let's flip back to this, right? So kind of lost now. Okay, so you get the accumulation zone, right? And then few years of bull market, price goes up, and then eventually it drops, right? The same accumulation zone, 3 years of bull market, price goes up, and then it drops. Okay, so essentially, this is essentially what it's trying to showcase, right? Bitcoin power curve cycle cloud, right? Many long-term Bitcoin investors, OGs, they actually refer to model like this because it combines historical data from past cycle to predict future trends. I think that makes absolute sense. And of course, I think it matters for us as well as people, Bitcoin investors in my compound life, because from a Bitcoin investor standpoint, it helps us essentially to see if the current price is normal or a bargain. If price hits the support line, it could be a good time to buy, as history shows, kind of like a rebounds. So it gives us confidence for holding through dips, showing Bitcoin's growth is predictable over years, and it's just not random, like, how a lot of people say that Bitcoin kind of goes in a way that it goes through a business cycle. Of course, you still need the business cycle to fuel some of the blow off tops, right? It simply just felt, if we follow through the 4-year cycle this time around, October last year, about 6, where Bitcoin peaked at $126,000, right? Which is magnificent, by the way, guys. It wasn't parabolic. A lot of it, maybe it's due to the limited liquidity in the market. We haven't gotten, the all-time high. Maybe it was a premature, high that was essentially taken down by, by the market makers, by the implosion of the, the Japanese government bond yield, resulting in the carry trade issue, right? So there are a lot of factors that has kept the Bitcoin parabolic move, right? However, it's still worth the while to remind all of you guys that the 4-year cycle still remain, because every 4 years, Bitcoin, the number of rewards for the miners will get half for each block that they somehow manage to mine or uncovered, right? So now kind of let's look into this and explain the situation we're in for Bitcoin based on this chart. So right now, in the early February, we're here somewhere. Can you guys see my mouse? Can you see my mouse here somewhere? Right. So look at the red line. That's the actual Bitcoin price, right? So this was last updated yesterday. Okay. So it slipped down to around $60,000. Okay. And touching all very close to the gray dash line. Okay. Can you guys see this? And this specific dash line is called the power curve support. Okay. So I reckon it's something very similar. Okay. So this specific gray line, this support is like a floor based on the power law maths. Okay, so where price has bounced back up in the past, every time the price drop, it bounced back. Every time the price drop towards this, this power curve, it bounced back. Okay, so a little bit like that 200 weeks moving average line that I show you all the time, right? And of course, if you look through this, the light blue shaded area, that's essentially, it's the 4-year cycle minimum maximum cloud, showing the range where price has swung in the previous cycle. Okay, so we're near the bottom of this cloud, meaning this could be the low point of the current cycle. So the black line that you're seeing here, this black line, this that goes around, the black line is the 4-year cycle mean, so an average path. So price is below it now, but the chart projects it, it's climbing back up. So, and of course, there's a gray dotted line for year 1 to 5. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, suggesting potential growth. Yeah, simply suggesting potential growth. So pretty cool stuff. Yeah. Let me try and get stuff. Okay. Where am I? Just lost my thinking. Okay, so all of this gray dotted line essentially it showcase, 1 to 5 years, suggesting potential growth to over. This is something that I think a lot of you guys love. 800,000 by 2030. If, of course, this pattern holds, right? So we never know. Will this hold? Of course, I want that to hold, right? What I want you all to take out from, reading this chart, right? We might be at the end of a bear phase in this cycle, entering a bull market soon. Okay, because based on this, previously it took about a year to get to the bear, right? From the high, takes about 12 to 15 months to get to the low, right? However, this time around, it does seem maybe we've gotten to the low earlier, right? But at the same time, you also have to factor in the fact that it can also retrace lower or retrace higher, right? So a few scenarios can potentially play out. So one of it is, that's constantly on my mind right now. So that's why I'm kind of thinking maybe I should DCA now as opposed to starting DCA sometime in November this year, right? So is this the bottom? That's basically one of the scenario where we will continue to go upwards from recent 60,000 dip, almost touching the 200 weeks moving average. Or another scenario could be, is the bottom still in October? Will we continue to dip for at least, right? Will we continue to dip a lot more further, maybe back to about 40 to 48,000? Continue to dip until October 2026, right? That it somehow still, get back there somewhere, right? So based on the historical trends, obviously I've mentioned all the time, Bitcoin takes about 12 to 15 months before finding its bottom. Okay, so something for all of us to consider and to think about. By no means these are financial advice. So I'm just helping all of us to do more research, I guess. Anyway, apart from this, let's quickly look through fear and greed index. Fear and greed index, we are in extreme fear. How can we still be in? Okay, we are in extreme fear. The price action was terrible. It dipped so much, although we're back at 70,000. But of course, we are still far, far, far away from the previous all-time high, I guess. So from week or 7 days, extreme fear. Pretty fearful right now. Let's take a quick look at ETF. ETF 6 of Feb, Bitcoin ETF. Look at that. People bought the dip. Right? People must be thinking that, this is the low now. This is like I'll come into the news to explain what causes the dip in just a moment, right? But yeah, I think perhaps in the morning, people found that out. Oh, this news is a nothing burger, right? So this can potentially mark the bottom for Bitcoin. So that's why they are accumulating. Maybe that could be the reason, right? However, for a Bitcoin ETF weekly, so this week continue to be bearish. However, this week so far we are outflow of 689 million as opposed to last week 1.49 billion. Okay, which is kind of like an improvement, I guess. For ETH ETF, it's 21.3 million outflow. Okay, so for ETH, I think weekly, yeah, it's also similar to Bitcoin. Improvement, 149 million total outflow versus 326 million outflow last week. Of course, quick look at Solana, sold ETF, outflow, total almost $12 million worth of outflow. And on a weekly basis, it's still positive, it's still bullish for Solana. It's actually much better than last week, with 2.82 million worth of inflow versus 6.7 million worth of outflow. Okay, so that's the situation with ETF. Okay, so let's now move on to the juicy part, right? Because I've been searching what the hell is happening that caused the Bitcoin crash, right? That brought us down to about 60,000. What were the triggers? You know, apart from the fact that, yes, a lot of leverage long got liquidated, and at the same time, when the price goes up, a lot of leverage short got liquidated, right? That's a given, right? But what were the main triggers, right? So let's start with the first one. The first one would be order haze. Okay, let's start with the first one. So order haze pins Bitcoin crash on BlackRock IBIT hedging. Okay, so this wasn't your average dip. It moved fast and felt force liquidation way beyond the usual suspect, like the hawkish Fed vibes, the data, that comes out every now and then that I talk to you guys about, right? Or the tech AI weakness, or standard leverage liquidation. What really stands out is BlackRock's IBIT Bitcoin ETF hitting insane record volumes, over $10 billion in spot trading and massive options activity, with premiums spiking to record highs, guys. So the charter points to a big non-crypto hedge fund, likely from Hong Kong. It's a Hong Kong base, getting wrecked elsewhere. So one of the main reasons, maybe it was due to yen carry trade blow-ups, too much silver exposure, or margin call on leverage bets. So resulting the hedge fund having to dump Bitcoin exposure hard through IBIT options. So that created a cascading effect, heavy selling pressure, especially in early Asian hours, that resulting to a huge drop across BTC, ETH, and Solana, and so forth, right? Because we always know that if Bitcoin drops, the second largest crypto, Ethereum, drops with it, and at the same time, the rest, L1, Solana, everything drops with it. Okay, so that's actually a pretty big, pretty big reason, right, of explaining why that massive drop. And of course, at the same time, when this happened, another second trigger, which I don't think are relevant, right? But somehow this also play out at the same time, that resulted in that huge, massive dips, right? So that second trigger, the second trigger also plays a huge role in accelerating this huge drop. And apparently, so I've also covered a little bit of this. Apparently, it was due to an exchange in South Korea, right? So I said, this is why I'll sack the intern. I don't think it's caused by the intern. I'm just like making fun of it. It was due to an exchange fail. I think 2,000 BTC, fat finger and dump. So BitTum, one of the exchange in South Korea, accidentally sent 2,000 BTC, right, to users instead of 2,000 won, right, which is supposedly $1.50, right? So someone make a cock up in the company. I think they were meant to do some airdrops for their users, right? Rather than sending 2,000 won, they somehow sent out 2,000 BTC. Okay. And of course, whomever received that BTC were like, oh man, this is like windfall, right? So they never quite asked any questions. Immediately they dump the market. Okay. So BTC on BitTum crashed 10% below global prices. No on-chain BTC move, pure internal ledger chaos, right? So I reckon there's actually a lot of paper BTC there too, right? So guys, brutal reminder, never leave your BTC, your Bitcoin in exchange. Just make sure you lock them away in your hardware wallet. Okay, so yeah, I think these were combined together. These were the two very, very important triggers that kind of brought down Bitcoin. And of course, other news that are affecting the Bitcoin price, and I think a lot of it was also due to some of the data that came out. Okay, so consumer sentiment were terrible. Okay, consumer beats forecast signal. Consumer sentiment is kind of like a survey that asks people how they feel about money and spending. For February preliminary, it came in at 57.3. Where's that? Better than the expected of 55. So last was 56.4. This data is for US economy, where if people feel good, they spend more. And of course, apart from that, consumer credit surges, shows borrowing spike too. That data also came out. So consumer credit measure how much people borrow for things like car loans, credit cards. And for the month of December, it was $24 billion, way above the $8 billion forecasted. And the last was about 4.7 billion. So this shows people are borrowing more, maybe confident or they simply need to spend, right? So this is, I don't know, I think somehow high borrowing can mean inflation stays up, and eventually Fed can affect the US Fed's decision on whether to have a rate cut in March or not. Okay, but anyhow, I think these are smaller news that affected the Bitcoin price drop. Okay, so the known one is actually, IBIT, as well as this South Korean exchange. Okay, so other interesting news section that I'm bringing you today. Billionaire Scaramucci. Okay, billionaire Scaramucci. Trillions waiting for Bitcoin bill. Okay, so Anthony Scaramucci is a rich investor who loves crypto. Okay, so he said on TV, live TV, that trillions of dollars are ready to buy Bitcoin once a market structure bill passes, right? and Democrats say it will. So I think it's very important that we get that clarity bill, stable, approving stable coin to have yield, etc. Or otherwise, we'll just continue to trend lower and lower for Bitcoin. So hear this out.
One of the real gatekeepers here is the Clarity Act. I think there's a lot of fence sitters, institutions, commercial banks, and otherwise that are really not going to move on Bitcoin until they get clarity from the U.S. government. And so I think it's a coin to us now whether or not that gets approved. Some of the Democratic senators I've spoken to say that it will, but I think that's one of the big gating factors here, and this is typical volatility for Bitcoin. One of the real gatekeepers.
Will the clarity bill help us to move Bitcoin? Okay. Will we flip and get back to the bull market? Right. Looking at the power curve, because put it this way, I think the whole getting to Trump level to have his signature on, it's not going to be for another few months, right? So we're in February already, right? I think the initial estimation would be sometime in June, okay? So I reckon by the time it gets to June, it may well take another few months for banks to, act upon it, for them to encourage investors to assign or reallocate into Bitcoin or whatever products, right? And that probably won't kick in until the next financial year, right? So they'll start to pivot, no doubt. They start to rotate, but I don't think any of that will kick in until much later, towards end of year or next year. So that kind of explains it, right? We get the clarity bill sometime in June or July. Market will feel good about it. However, we still won't get any price action improvement for Bitcoin. And then eventually, that would bring us to the bottom. Maybe sometime in Q3 or Q4, and then ready for the next bull cycle start next year. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think, right? Always keen to hear from all of you guys. Okay, so before we finish off today, I just want to bring some hopium for you guys. We all love hopium. I love hopium too. One final hopium. Tom Lee, Bitcoin bottom is in, about to go parabolic, right? So let's hear Tom Lee out.
Good news is 7 of 7 O's were all V-shaped recoveries. So we had a waterfall decline. If crypto's bottoming now, which it kind of looks like it is, especially given MicroStrategy's 25% move, the recoveries are V-shaped. So we recover as quickly as we've fallen.
Okay, so there you go. Tom Lee's hopium for the weekend. I hope everyone's will have a good weekend. Drop a like, guys. Hit subscribe. I'm really low in my subscriber count, and I totally believe that by the time I hit 1,000 subscribers, a undisclosed source told me that if I hit 1,000 subscribers, we should be able to get out of the bear market. Okay, so help me out, help yourself out too, right? So hit the like, hit subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.